All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about really what I find to be the biggest problem with the mainstream way of looking at the Holocaust. I've looked at several books on the Holocaust, and one thing that I notice is that they, I noticed that a lot of people like to treat Adolf Hitler as if he was some sort of a madman. And a lot of people like to do this sort of thing, not just people who study history, but just regular people who watch documentaries on Hitler and the Third Reich and the rise of Nazism. And this is a very, very dangerous perspective to take. And I think that such a way of thinking really does a disservice to the study on the Holocaust. Now, why do I say this? Well, the reason why I say this is because the purpose of studying the Holocaust is to prevent another Holocaust. The purpose of studying genocide is to prevent genocide. So we study history. That way we learn from the evils that mankind, or we learn from the fact that mankind fell for certain evil ideas. So that way we can prevent society from falling for those very evil ideas. So when you warn people, and this is why I say that it does a huge disservice to treat Hitler as if he was a madman. Because when you warn people about a future Hitler taking power, they will say, no, 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 the political leader or the cult of personality that I am falling for is not a madman. Right? This leader of this cult of personality that I'm falling for is not a madman. This political leader that I'm falling for is not a madman. Hitler was a madman. And so because when you tell people that a Hitler is coming, they're waiting for a madman, or they are anticipating a madman. When a real Hitler pops up and takes power, and people see that he is intelligent, people see that he is pointing to real problems, people see that he is proposing solutions for real problems, they will say, well, what are you talking about? This guy is not a madman. This guy is a practical leader who has a strategy to fix certain problems and to ameliorate certain problems. And so when you tell people about a future Hitler, they think that you are talking about an insane person. They think that you're talking about, or that you are warning about, a madman. But the reality is that Hitler was not a madman. The reality is that the Nazis pointed to real problems, and the solution that they prescribed for those problems was genocide. And so when you have a cult of personality rising up, and this cult of personality starts to point to real problems and says that it's going to fix those problems, then the masses say, oh, we're going to follow this cult of personality. And then when someone says, no, 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 this cult of personality that you are following is like Nazism, it's like the Third Reich, this leader that you're following is like Adolf Hitler, the followers of such a cult of personality will respond by saying, no, 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 Hitler was a madman. We are following a practical, rational, observant cult of personality, or we are following a political party that is rational and that is practical. And so this is the reason why I say it's so dangerous to portray Hitler as a madman. Because when you warn people about a coming Hitler, people think that you're talking about a madman. And so when the real Hitler pops up, or when another Hitler pops up in our own times, people are going to say, oh, wow, he's not like Hitler. Hitler was crazy. This person is rational. And they will follow him, thinking that they are not following a Hitler, but rather a practical and rational and logical human being. When you read about why Nazism became popular, what you will find out is that the Germans were terrified of the rise of communism. They were terrified of the Red Terror. And who could blame them? The fact is that the Bolsheviks were butchering millions of people. The fact is that the Leninists and the Bolsheviks and the Marxists, they were mass murdering evil people. The fact is that the Bolshevik government was murderous. The fact is that there were communists in Germany who wanted Germany to become a Soviet satrap, a Soviet satellite state. And you had events like the Spartacist uprising, which was a Marxist leftist uprising. And a number of the people who led that revolution just so happened to be Jewish. There was the Munich Revolution that took place not too long after World War I. And it was a communist uprising that wished to make Germany into a Soviet satellite state. And who was one of the leaders of that revolution? It was Eugene Levine, who was Jewish. And so the Germans were terrified of the rise of communism. In comes Adolf Hitler to be their savior. And that's why when you watch Hitler's speeches, you will notice that a lot of people in the crowds looked drunk. They looked absolutely hysterical, very emotional, very erratic. Why was that? Because they saw Hitler as their hero, as their savior, who was going to save them from the mass murdering communists. And so when the Germans were invading the Soviet Union, they did so in the name of what? In the name of fighting communism. And was not communism a murderous ideology? Was not the Soviet Union a mass murdering regime? So on paper, everything seemed legitimate and noble and necessary. Stalin did have expansionist aspirations. The Germans did make a pact with the Soviet Union. And part of that pact was that the Soviet Union would have its own sphere of influence, as would the Germans. The Soviets invaded Finland. Okay, well, Finland was agreed to be a part of the Soviets' sphere of influence in Northern Europe. But the Soviets continued to expand. They had expansionist aspirations. So the Germans said, okay, well, we got to put a stop to this. We got to put a stop to this. And today, you could totally see people following an Adolf Hitler. You could totally see, let's say, a leader rising up in Germany saying, we have to unite Europe. We have to create a pan-European military force led by Germany because we have Russia, which is expansionistic, which has taken over Ukraine. And who knows, perhaps Poland will be next. Perhaps Germany could be on Russia's crosshairs. So we need to have a charismatic militarist leader. And if such a leader rises up in the future and ends up ruling a massive pan-German-led or a pan-European political or geopolitical powerhouse led by Germany, if such a geopolitical powerhouse rises up in the future, and you have a Hitler in the future, you're going to have people saying, "Wow, this guy is like Adolf Hitler." But then you're going to have a whole bunch of other people saying, no, Russia is expansionistic. We need a great leader. This man is not like Hitler. Hitler was a madman. And so they will follow a Hitler, thinking that they are not following a Hitler because in their minds, Hitler was a madman. And this leader that they will follow will be a rational, practical, logical strategist. And so the danger behind just painting Hitler as this madman who decided to do what he did out of nowhere leads people to follow Hitlers, or will lead people to follow Hitlers, thinking that they are not following a Hitler because in their perception, Hitler was a madman, when the reality was that the Nazis pointed to real problems. And if you look at the Nazis today, the Bjorn Holkes, if you look at these far-right nationalists in Europe, what are they doing? They are pointing to real problems. The problem with Islamic terrorism, the problem with criminality amongst refugees, the problem with rape gangs in the UK or other parts of Europe. They are pointing to real problems, but they are doing so with the motivation that is evil. With a motivation of eugenics, with a motivation of mass murder, with a motivation of despotism, just as the Nazis pointed to the danger of communism, with the motivation of mass murder and eugenics and Lebensraum. And you see this sort of thing in Israel today. You have these far-right Israelis who want to do a genocide on the Palestinians. And it's amazing. There was an article that was published on the Times of Israel recently, a number of days ago, and this article was written by some Israeli nationalist. And in this article, he literally said Israel needs to have its Lebensraum if it's going to survive. He used a Nazi term, Lebensraum, to justify Israeli expansionism into the Palestinian territories. He's using a Nazi term, and the Times of Israel was so embarrassed by this, they had to delete the article. But I found it on archive.is, but the Times of Israel got rid of the article. Why do you have an Israeli using a Nazi term? Because the spirit of Nazism is not limited to one race. It's not limited to the Germans or to the Swedes or to the Dutch. Fascism is not limited to the Italians. You can have Jewish fascists who are just as evil as the Nazis were. But if I say, listen, there is an Israeli Nazism that's rising, or there is a murderous ideology that is becoming very popular in Israel, and it is akin to Nazism, what do people say? Oh, no, you can't make that comparison. You can't make that parallel. Hitler was a madman. These Israeli nationalists are simply trying to fight a real problem, the problem of Islamic terrorism. Well, I would say that the Nazis also presented themselves as facing a real danger, a real problem, and that problem was communism. But again, people would object to such a parallel because in their minds, they have this conception of Hitler as this madman, when the reality is that Hitler simply did a strategy of using a pretext to justify genocide, as every single dictator who conducted a genocide did in history. Genociders, genocidal cults of personality will always point to real problems to justify mass murder. The fact is that most people don't understand this, and they have this idea of Hitler as the madman, when the reality is that Hitler was a strategist who pointed to real problems to justify genocide. The fact is that most people don't understand this, and the fact that they don't understand this leads me to conclude that people will follow a future Hitler, thinking that they are following a pragmatic leader who's going to fix a problem, when the reality is that dictators always point to real problems to justify evil. And this is actually what Satan does. Satan will point to real problems to justify evil. Why do you think the Bible calls Satan the accuser? Because he points out real problems, real sins. But he will use those to bring torment to people. It's satanic. It's a satanic strategy, pointing to real problems to justify even greater evils. Anyway, I've talked long enough. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.